And so we wrap up this return to 1981 with a quick run through all the teams to assess how they've done and look forward to 1982. As ever, there's a version of this without the Neum sound effects, link in the description. Williams-Ford. After a season of relative domination with 8 wins in 1980, 1981 was a bit of a come down for the team, despite, in the end, successfully defending their Constructors' title. Early signs looked good, in performance terms at least, with wins in the first 2 races, and the stage was set for Carlos Reutemann and Alan Jones to duke it out for the title. But then it all went wrong. The others started catching up, a series of technical problems and just plain bad luck beset Jones in particular, and when Reutemann glumly predicted after Silverstone that he didn't think he'd finish higher than 3rd the rest of the season, he was almost proved right, instead having to watch his championship lead get whittled away race by race. Only once before the final race did he lose the lead to Piquet, only to gain it back again, but for all the drama of Caesar's Palace there was a sense that it was inevitable by the end that the title would go Nelson's way. As for Jones, what should have been a spirited title defence by the popular Aussie ended up being a real trial of a year, with just 1 win, 3 second places and a 3rd before getting that final win in Las Vegas. By then, he'd already decided to retire, but his dominant win in the parking lot reminded everyone why he was defending champion, and ensured at least that he went out on a high note. That is, unless Frank can tempt him back for next year. Tyrrell-Ford. Ken Tyrrell has always had a reputation for spotting driving talent, even when the car he's putting them in hasn't been up to much. There were high hopes for the new 011 chassis, which was introduced mid-season, but it didn't really deliver the hoped-for improvements, not helped by the decision to split the difference on tyres. All of that said, Eddie Cheever did well to score points on 5 occasions, and deserves his shot at the big time with Ligier next year. And in the second car, there's not really much to be said about Kevin Kogan and Riccardo Zanino, both just there to fill the seat and provide some funding for the very sponsor-like team, but Michele Alboreto did well enough. He never quite fulfilled the promise he showed by outqualifying Cheever in his first race, but at least some of that will have been due to the teams diverting most of their resources to Eddie, and the Avon tyres Michele was using just not being quite as good. The Italian one to keep an eye on for the future, but not the finished article yet. Brabham-Ford. After Williams won the first 2 races, Piquet's dominant win in Argentina seemed to suggest that, rather than being all about Jones and Reutemann, the story of the season would be, can anyone stop Piquet and the Brabham with the trick suspension, which threatened in turn to become a battle over the legality of said car. In the end, most of the other teams simply copied the suspension or came up with their own way of achieving the same thing, and the authorities were, if not satisfied, then at least willing to accept a slightly farcical situation where everyone knew the cars were running lower than permitted while underway, but as long as they stopped and hit the lift button when measured, a blind eye was turned. In any case, the feared Piquet dominance didn't quite materialise, not helped by a trio of early exits in Belgium, Monaco and Spain. He should have won in France, of course, and would have done if the rain had just held off another lap or 2, but in the end it didn't matter, and he took the World Championship, the second Brazilian to do so, following in the footsteps of his hero Emerson Fittipaldi. Oh yeah, there was another car as well, wasn't there? Hector Ribaki gave as good an account of himself as he could have been expected to in the circumstances, and could have followed Nelson home for the second win in Argentina if his distributor arm hadn't broken. But in the end, a trio of 4th places and a 5th was the sum total of his reward. Whether the highly rated Riccardo Patrese will do any better in the car next year rather depends on whether Bernie and Gordon Murray decide they want to add the Constructors' title to their trophy cabinet, or if they will continue concentrating on Piquet alone with the switch to the BMW turbo engine. McLaren-Ford. The road back to competitiveness for McLaren has been a long one. The team had struggled ever since James Hunt's championship 5 years ago, and while normally Formula One fans dislike sponsors interfering in the running of teams, it seems to have worked well for Teddy Mayer's team. Between the more professional approach brought by Ron Dennis and his Project 4 team, and the introduction of John Barnard's revolutionary new MP4 chassis that resulted from their work, the turnaround has been remarkable. Watson's win at Silverstone was a bit of a fluke, to be fair, but he'd been knocking on the door for a couple of races, and while he never quite hit those heights again and often faded into the midfield, it's a good start to build on, and in another year or so, with the right personnel behind the scenes and at the wheel, McLaren can return to the top table. Andrea de Cesaris didn't exactly cover himself in glory in the second car, and he gained for himself an unfortunate reputation he's going to find it difficult to shake off. His Marlborough connections will probably find him a seat next year, probably at Alfa Romeo, and Niki Lauda will be coming in to take his McLaren berth. That will certainly be an upgrade, and it will be interesting to see how it all turns out. ATS-Ford. Günther Schmidt's circus continued in 1981, with Jan Lammers returning to the team, falling out with the owner and leaving again, and they got through 3 team managers as well, Joe Ramirez, Roger Havens and Alistair Caldwell, as part of the general deterioration in relations within the team, exemplified by the whole pulling the front wing off and stamping on it incident. Somehow, in among all of that, Slim Borgard managed to score a point, just the 3rd points finish in the team's history, which suggests he's got something about him other than, hey, did you know he's also a drummer and worked with ABBA? That was as good as it got, although the new car when it appeared did qualify most of the time, even if finishing was another matter entirely. No indications as yet about what the plans are for 1982, but on current form whatever is decided now will probably have changed by the start of next year anyway. Lotus-Ford. Like McLaren, Lotus have been in the doldrums recently, and a lot of it has been, unfortunately, self-inflicted. Both 1979's Lotus 80 and 1981's Lotus 88 turned out to be dead ends, though in the latter case that was more because of the regulations than the car itself being a dud. Even so, it was a distraction the team didn't need, as they also dealt with the failure of their sponsorship deal with Essex and the arrest, release, disappearance and reappearance of its owner, David Thiem. With all that going on, and a hastily designed stopgap car, it's hardly surprising that tempers frayed as at Silverstone, and that the results weren't quite there. De Angelis was pretty consistent though, scoring in 8 of the 14 rounds that the team entered, while Nigel Mansell scored the best individual result with 3rd in Belgium in just his 6th Grand Prix. But otherwise Nigel was the one with all the breakdowns. Between the 80 and the 88, Colin Chapman's reputation as a genius innovator has taken a bit of a hit, as has his own morale and motivation. With the regulations for 1982 still up in the air, he and the rest of the F1 world will be waiting to see what takes to the road. The 2 drivers will remain at the wheel though, despite interest particularly in Elio from Williams and Alfa Romeo. Ensign-Ford. Mo Nunn's little team rather punched above their weight in 1981, with 3 points finishes and a fastest lap for Mark Sierra. The Swiss driver was certainly an asset to the team, and if only they could have afforded to keep him in the cockpit, who knows what might have happened. A bullet was probably dodged, with the exclusion of Ricardo Londoño Bridge, given what we now know, but they needed the money, just as they needed Eliseo Salazar's Chilean pesos. And with all that, they only failed to qualify for 1 race. Not bad for a little garage team. To be fair to Salazar, while his qualifying positions weren't as good as Sierra's, and he had a couple of accidents late on, he also scored Chile's first F1 point and drove a fine race before his engine ran out of oil in Austria. Ensign haven't yet confirmed anything for next year, but they can at least show some promising results to prospective sponsors. Renault. After putting in the hard yards over the last few years, developing the turbo engine concept, the Renault concern were hoping to be championship contenders in 1981 with the recruitment of the highly promising youngster Alain Prost. He certainly made his mark, taking 3 wins, and thoroughly demoralised the more experienced René Arnoux, who was really under pressure. After winning twice in 1980, he only made the podium once all year in 1981. Reliability has always been Renault's Achilles heel, and so it proved this year, though things improved with the introduction of a new car and slowly improved throughout the year. Helpfully, the improvement in reliability coincided with the faster circuits that suited the car better. Continuity going forward into 1982, and the team will be hoping that from 4th in 1980 to 3rd in 1981, they can be title contenders, and hopefully winners, in 1982. March-Ford. Early on, the team run by Ram Racing looked like a complete joke, and John McDonnell was openly scathing about the car that the March concern had delivered them. But the recruitment of Adrian Reynard and Gordon Coppock to work on the car, lightening it, stiffening it and shortening the wheelbase helped move it towards competitiveness, and when Salazar departed for Ensign after Monaco, the team concentrated their resources on Derek Daly's car, which could have scored a point with a little more luck in Britain and Canada. The trajectory seems to be upward, but much will depend for 1982 on lessons learned in the design department and who will be behind the wheel. Fittipaldi-Ford. The Brazilian team go into the winter season unsure if it will see the start of next year after a thoroughly dismal second half of the season, which won't have endeared them to any sponsors. As it turned out, Chico Serra's 7th place at Long Beach was as good as it was going to get, and everyone from the Fittipaldi brothers on down was thoroughly disheartened by the end of the year. Keke Rosberg has shown that he's a decent driver before, but even he couldn't get much out of the car, and young Serra really struggled to make his mark, much less fill the shoes of Emerson Fittipaldi as Keke's teammate. There's a lot of talent in the team, even after the departure of designer Harvey Postlethwaite to Ferrari, but that means nothing with no budget. If they don't make it to 1982, it will be a sad end for the team started with such high hopes as Kopasuka back in 1975. Alfa Romeo. At the end of 1980, the team seemed to have recovered from the shock of Patrick Depaille's death in qualifying, and there were promising signs with Giacomelli's pole position at Watkins Glen. But Mario Andretti may well look back at his decision to pick Alfa Romeo over McLaren at the start of the year with regret, given the relative fortune of the teams. But then, McLaren looked like an even worse proposition at the time. Even so, it's looking like this car, now 3 years old, will have been Mario's last ride in F1 as he prepares to return to Indy racing, and if rumours are right and it'll be Giacomelli and De Cesaris next year, a lot will be riding on Bruno's shoulders. There was a sense, though, that 1981 saw Alfa treading water, just waiting for next year, with a promised turbo engine and new car, though mid-season recruit Gerard Ducarouge did what he could with the aging 179 chassis, that at least got it moving in the right direction again, and got Giacomelli the team's first podium since their return to the sport at the last race in Las Vegas. They'll be taking that memory into the winter break with them, and hoping that it signals better times to come. Talbot Ligier-Matra. There were doubts about the big changes at Vichy with the increased state involvement through Talbot, a branch of Peugeot Sports division, and the switch to Matra V12 engines too, and early on it just didn't seem to all be gelling, not helped by the abortive comeback of Jean-Pierre Jabouille. Once that distraction was past, the reorganisation of the team around Jacques Lafitte and amendments to the chassis and development of the Matra engine all helped the Ligier team to recapture some of the form that they'd shown over the last couple of years. And Lafitte pretty much came out of nowhere to be a title contender going into the last race. If he had come away from Las Vegas as France's first world champion, it would have been a great smash and grab, but he'll go into 1982 feeling good nonetheless. But the flip side, of course, is that the team's reorganisation to Saint Lafitte meant that Patrick Tambay never quite got the support and struggled to make his mark. He'd already been seen as a driver who'd had a shot, as James Hunt's teammate at McLaren, and blown it, and there's danger for him that he's now a driver who's had a shot and blown it twice. And you have to fear for Eddie Cheever in the same situation next year, who may well be regarding Ligier as his shot at the big time. Ferrari. After a dismal 1980, when Ferrari finished 10th in the table behind Fittipaldi and Arrows and didn't finish higher than 5th in any race, 1981 was a marked improvement. 2 wins for Gilles Villeneuve in possibly the most unlikely places, Monaco and Jarama, both twisty circuits where the poor handling of the Ferrari 126CK should have been a handicap. Ferrari have a history of putting powerful engines in indifferent chassis, and this year was certainly no exception. The bosses at Renault must have been pretty annoyed that after they'd spent years perfecting their turbo engines, Ferrari came straight in and were immediately on the pace. And more or less reliable. There were engine failures and turbo blowouts for sure, but nothing like Renault's first year. Villeneuve was already a hero to both Ferrari fans and Canadians, and did a lot to reinforce that, but also continued to make errors due to over-exuberance, and if he wants to mount a serious title challenge, once Ferrari sort their cars out again, he'll need to work on that. Didier Pironi in the second car really struggled to make his mark though. Ferrari isn't an easy place to come into, especially alongside an established star, and if you're the replacement for a world champion, and the calls in the Italian motoring press for him to be fired started early on. But the team stuck with him, he's confirmed for 1982, and we'll hope that a winter spent testing and learning the car will see him improve next year. Arrows-Ford. Very much a season of two halves for Jackie Oliver's boys, beginning with the team's first pole position at Long Beach. Riccardo Patrese didn't finish that one, but did take third place at the next race in Brazil and second at Imola, and he never qualified outside the top 10. But then from Spain onwards he was rarely in the top 10, and those two podium places ended up being the team's only points of the year, albeit enough to place them 8th overall and Patrese 11th in the drivers' standings. In the second car, Siegfried Stoll simply struggled to get to grips with Formula 1, and two accidents, the start line crash in Belgium and his big off in Germany, finished off his confidence entirely. In truth, Patrese was probably flattering the year-old A3 chassis, which also reacted badly to the shifted Pirelli tyres, and just fell behind as the others developed. With Patrese on his way for 1982, Stoll retiring and Villeneuve only ever a short-term hire, it's unknown who will be driving next year. There's a new car planned too, so it's all changed for 1982. For the better, they will hope. Osella-Ford. After a debut year with just one finish, the team hoped that 1981 would see progress, but there were early setbacks. The serious accident to Guerra at Imola, followed by the death of mechanic Giovanni Amadeo at the next race at Zolder. After some stopgap drivers brought in, the team rather fell on their feet with the recruitment of Jean-Pierre Jarier, who brought an immediate and significant improvement, taking the Osella from only occasional qualification to being a solid midfield runner, and with a little more luck he might have got their first point. Of course, that did rather contrast with the efforts of Beppe Gabbiani in the other car, and it's understandable, if it seems rather harsh, that the team seemed to immediately lose interest in him and just see out his contract, while fundamentally ignoring him. Jarier wound up at Osella after being disappointed to miss out on the full-time Ligier drive, and will have been putting in the effort to show them how wrong they were. So while Enzo Osella will undoubtedly like to keep him on for next year, Jarier will probably see that as a failure. Theodore-Ford. A solid first year as a full independent team, though the Hong Kong-based outfit never quite lived up to scoring a point at their first race. The TY01 turned out to be pretty reliable, even if it wasn't reliably pretty, and while it rarely achieved the dizzy heights of the midfield, they had a lot better debut year than, for example, Toleman or Osella last year. The mid-season departure of Patrick Tambay to Ligier could have been a disaster, but the availability of the talented Marc Surer meant that the team was able to bring in someone who could maintain their level of performance, even if they did slip back a little bit down the qualifying order. But a debut year with a point and only 2 DNQs is a solid start, all of which, of course, is a secondary concern to finding the money to keep going. Teddy Yip isn't short of a few quid, of course, but he's a businessman and isn't going to bankroll the team forever. They need to convince investors that they're a good bet for sponsorship. They've lived from hand to mouth this year, but it will need a much more solid footing going forward. Toleman-Hart. A fascinating team, an all-British outfit with Italian backing from Candy and Pirelli. A small independent team, more politically aligned with the major manufacturers thanks to their turbo engines, and a dominant F2 operation finding out in real time that F1 is a lot harder. They started off almost as a joke, so far off the pace it looked like they'd bitten off far more than they could chew, but they kept plugging away, getting closer and closer, before Brian Henton finally put a Toleman in the race in Italy, to the delight of race sponsor Candy, and then keeping it running to the end to record a top 10 finish. Derek Warwick repeated the feat of qualifying at Caesar's Palace, though he didn't make it to the end of what was his first motor race of any kind for almost a year at that point. The team will hope to continue that progress in 1982, with Brian Hart working on an improved turbo engine, and Rory Byrne and John Gentry working to improve the chassis. And that's it for 1981. It's been fun revisiting it, but I'm looking forward to returning to the 90s in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy a detour to 1932. I've been asked a couple of times in comments if I'm going to redo 1982, and maybe someday. I don't want to get into an endless cycle of remaking earlier seasons, but it is one that would probably benefit from it. Maybe in another couple of years or so.